Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Read TFOS, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. If my voice sounds a little bit off, I'm still recovering from the dreaded lurgy and a teeny tiny bit of vocal strain. Anyways, on to the story. The Hunt, written by Lostfol. "Do you think it's hunting us again?" Alcat asked as he scraped his small arm claws over part of his back carapace. His larger clawed arms in front of him ringing over themselves, a sign of nervousness in his chitin-clad species. A realization had set in of how it was ironic that they, the alpha predator of Onre, were being hunted. Rossett, his commander, gave him a glare. "When the sun goes down, it hunts. Watch each other's backs. No one goes off alone. We've lost enough soldiers and colonists already. We have to find this creature and stop it. This route is critical to the success of this colony." Alcat quieted down. Rossett was over 9 feet tall when he extended his chitin-clad legs, big even in the chka. His chitin carapace was such a dark blue it looked like black mirror. He didn't like having his authority questioned. Between the losses to accidents and this monster, everyone felt helpless. The captain was at the point of violence. He had lost much of his command to a beast that stalked them and accidents. Alcat could feel his chitin clatter in fear, an all too common feeling of late. His squad of 5 had drawn patrol tonight. This monster had plagued this colony since it landed. Every night they tried to protect the colony. Every night they lost more of the soldier class. Then, when daylight came, the poor colonists would try to build up more, but there was always an accident. Far too many died in bizarre accidents. None believed it to be pure chance, but no one ever saw exactly what happened. None would voice that they thought it was the beast. That frightening thought would imply that it was more than a beast hunting them. Sitting at the base of the valley, the wall they had erected around the colony felt more of a pen than protection. Each time a patrol disappeared or an accident killed more of them, it put those remaining more on edge. They had been there 3 months and already lost 50 soldiers and 200 civilians. Alcat was dwelling on this as the gates of their wall creaked open. The moans of the alloy slid in the tracks, sounding like a lost souls to his shattered nerves. More proof of the haste in which they had put together the construction. He could still pick up on the vague scent of burning oil that clung to the air from the fuel dump accident this morning. 10 Chakta had died in that one. He had been resting in the barracks when it happened. He couldn't forget how their dark blue chitin carapaces bleached white from the heat. He had helped in the struggle to put out the fire. Later, in bitterness, he reflected on how they had felt it had been an ideal location. They had placed the colony next to a river that in a dozen or so miles emptied into one of this planet's oceans. There was a mountain pass behind it, an old-growth forest on either side. They had easily wiped out the human colony that was already there in a surprise attack. The last night of the cycle flickered as the sun went behind the mountains, as the light played across the open fields outside the wall. Alcat could feel his dread rising. Soon, the only light there would be from the 2 moons' faint glow. The air temperature was starting to drop. With a chilled bite, it blew across the patrol. There was a scent like impending rain. Looking back, Alcat felt relieved they could still see the safety of the walls. He again cursed the system's lack of a second sun that would illuminate the whole cycle. He wished that he could get his claws on that intelligence officer. Bastard has sat there and told them this planet was near Garden Planet, no large natural predators. Yet, there they were, stumbling around blind in the pitch blackness of night, looking for a predator. They had tried erecting large spotlights to illuminate the forest. Around the colony, they held off the inky blackness and the danger it brought. It wouldn't matter, though. Someone would still die, he thought. He knew his outlook was grim. He did his best to hide it from his squad. As his squad began their patrol, they would be going into the eastern woods. He knew this would take them through the charred ruins of the human colony. He could feel his fear building. He always felt that he was being watched. The entire way through that part of the patrol, thinking of it as he felt his chitin start to clatter. They were far enough now. He couldn't see the colony. Only the faint glow in the dark from their lighting gave any sign where the colony was. Seeing the human ruins, Alket's mind wandered to Tlakaelel. His friend had researched humans some after this monster started stalking the colony. Tlakaelel's theory was one of the dead humans had come back because they hadn't disposed of them in the proper manner. Problem with researching humans is you never know what is real and what isn't. The humans had entire classifications for undead and spirit that didn't even include those from their many religious beliefs. It didn't help Tlakaelel though. He had disappeared from a patrol the night after they had discussed it. They had found most of him the next morning. Alket knew his thoughts were grim and he felt distracted. Not a good way to start this patrol. Tlakaelel had found lists of everything from zombies to blood-sucking monsters. He insisted that dead humans could become any of many types of monsters. Alket had laughed at him then, buzzing his chitin. Now he was wishing to study those findings closer. He again found himself thinking about their landing. He had been part of the squad involved in the slaughter of the humans that had been here. The strike had been perfect. They caught the humans by surprise. They hadn't been able to put up a struggle as their fighting vehicles rolled over houses. Those trying to run burned down with plasma fire. Turning up his lights, he shuddered at the shadows, casting such horrid darkness. This creature could be anywhere. The creature was savage and intelligent, that was certain. More than a couple times, an entire patrol never returned. Those who did tell of soldiers vanishing into the dark so fast that no one even got a light on them. They only caught glimpses of fur if they ever saw anything, and of the traps the creature would put out along their path. He still hadn't forgotten the death of his predecessor as a squad leader. A tree trunk had fallen on him, crushing him and 2 other members of the patrol. It hung over the trail. A hidden rope had triggered it, awaiting the unfortunate. Alket had been lucky enough that he was behind them. The sickening crunch and warm spray of their bioluminescent blood as it hit him, that would forever haunt his nights. However many he had left, he grimly thought. They were about halfway through the human ruins now. Alket knew this wasn't the worst part. While the human ruins set a dismal scene, he knew real terror awaited him in the forest. Soon he would hear the beast's noises as it began to stalk them. The certainty that some of the squad members would die was already making him sick. The rest of the patrol was showing signs of their nervousness too, but the command was desperate. No matter the losses, they would keep sending squads to hunt this beast. And of course, hunting the beast when it was moving was what leadership felt was best. Too bad they aren't out here doing it, Alket thought, bitterness so deep that he could almost taste it. Poor pulse was on point. His chitin was clattering so hard Alket could hear it. His fear louder than even the rustle of leaves made in the night breeze. That's when they heard the beast. The sound was reminiscent of a warning klaxon, a long, loud boo. Sometimes the first one would last up to 30 seconds, reverberating through the valley. Alket knew all in the colony heard it. Many in the colony felt that it was the sound of stolen spirits begging for release. None could sleep through that horrible noise. Alket again wondered how this colony had gone so wrong. They had started with 2,000 Choctaw civilians and about 200 soldiers. They had standard seed colonies set up with emergency provisions and protection. He remembered the shock of finding a human colony of about 500 here. They had deployed their soldiers in a swift noon raid. They had not even lost 20 men. Humans could be fierce fighters, but their surprise was complete. He remembered how on the first few days, watching the sun glimmer off the river, he had thought it a perfect colony site. As his patrols approached the woods, he could feel the fear creeping into his veins. He realized that he had never felt fear on this level before. They were conquerors. Yet now they felt more like prey. He wondered if this monster had plagued the humans. It likely only turned its attention to the Choctaw once it ran out of easy prey. As they walked their assigned patrol path, the darkness of the woods seemed to try and swallow them. their lights fighting to keep the tendrils of inky blackness at bay. In the dark, he could hear the calls of the various creatures that called the dog home. The occasional sudden movement in the bush would make the entire squad jump. Then they would hear that dreaded beast baw again, always closer. The smell of Pult's fear gland was not helping the situation. The alien forest had underbrush that was multi-hued. It played tricks on their eyes in the bright lights, reflecting back dizzying arrays of color. As the chill began to set in, he could feel his body function slow. Were it not for the heated suits, he would have shut down by now. He forgot all that as another boo sounded, like it was right next to him. The whole squad's fear glands emptied at that. With no other choice, they went deeper into the forest. A sudden crash of the brush next to them caused Pult to fire his plasma rifle blindly into the woods. Something small and dense was moving fast. Everyone followed his lead. None of them hit in the dark. Then the creature ran through their lights across the trail. It was one of the humans' domesticated farm animals that had fled during their attack. A pig, he seemed to recall. The whole squad started making a buzzing reverberation of their chitin. It was a sign of relieved humor amongst the Choctaw. As the humor died down, he looked back to tell Tulk, who was bringing up the rear, about Pult's body. That's when he realized that Tulk was gone, vanished at that moment. Alcat was mere feet away and had never even heard a sound. Immediately, they went into a defensive circle, calling out for Tulk. Alcat hoped the young soldier had stepped off the trail and would respond. He knew it wasn't likely, though. In the darkness, he heard the methodical snapping, the sickening noise of chitin crunching and breaking. Alcat signaled his squad forward, spread out in a fan formation. Their lights aimed towards the source of the noise. As they wandered further into the woods, though, the snapping fell silent. They didn't find Tulk, but they found a trail of the bioluminescent blood his species had. Alcat halted his squad, then ordered everyone to turn off their lights. The entire section of the forest they were in glowed, covered in the faint green. Again a rustle and a crashing in the underbrush. They swung towards it, turning their lights to only shoot at another of those pigs. He realized to his horror that the pig's face was glowing as it tore off through the underbrush. They couldn't hit it in the darkness. Then they heard another boo-woo. He wished he could say that he headed back to the trail with calm decorum. Reality is, they ran as fast as they could, their lights on. The 4 remaining members started moving down the trail. They were far more intent on finishing the patrol than actually finding anything. Alcat actually hoped that he didn't find anything else. And as quick as it happened, everything was quiet again. As they started moving down the trail, Pult turned towards Alcat to ask a question. Alcat never heard the question. He heard the snap of the branch breaking. Then a log came flying by where Pult had stood, leaving a faint green splatter. He remembered how Pult's light created a surreal flashing effect as it tumbled through the air. It broke as it struck something. The log came back, unlike Pult, swinging from the trees above, one end of it glowing a faint green. Alcat could smell his own fear gland empty again, something he didn't realize was even possible. Alcat and his 2 remaining squad members stood there and stared at the log, not sure if they should run back the way they came or continue on. They were over halfway through the patrol, deep in the woods now. The trees blocked any view of the light from the colony. Racklet and Squiff looked at Alcat, their fear clear in the clanking of their chitin. Alcat knew staying there wasn't an option.
Let's keep going. It's shorter than going back.
Racklet on point. Keep your eyes open for traps. They had not heard any more of the monster's calls. Every so often, one of them would claim to have seen a glimpse of fur. They felt like the woods were alive and watching them. Both soldiers nodded. Racklet moved forward, taking point, while Squiff pulled rear guard. The rest of the way through the forest, nothing happened. Though they all flinched with each branch that snapped or call of the nocturnal animals. Alkit felt a sense of extreme relief as the forest began to thin. They were coming out next to a cliff on their left side. Racket even seemed to pick his pace up some as they approached the edge of the forest. Alkit looked back, making sure Squiff was still with him, when he felt the crash of something hitting the ground in front of him before careening into the woods. Even as he turned, he knew Racket was gone. He had felt the bioluminescent blood splatter on him when it had happened. Pieces of Racket's chitin remained along with the faintly glowing stain in the trail. He could see the boulder that had gone by in the woods, glowing a faint green. Boo! With that cry, and seeing the colony ahead, Alkit and Squirf took off running towards its safety. Squirf never made it. Alkit never saw what happened to him. When he had reached the light, he was calling in panic for anyone to open the gates. As they did, he remembers looking back and seeing something. He didn't get a good look, but he saw it covered in fur. Its eyes had reflected the light. No lights seemed needed. It was dragging something dark and still into the woods. Alkit feared that it was Squiff. Entering the gate was the last thing he remembered. Alkit awoke to a horrible kaboom. The whole medical building shook with enough violence to throw him out of the medical pod he was in. For a moment, he was sure the building would collapse. He stumbled out of the temporary building to look at what he already knew to be true. They had their ship about half a mile east of the colony, near where this patrol had been. It held their vehicles, most of their food stores, and was their only form of off-planet communications. That ship should have been empty by now, but the daily accidents and the nightly beast hunts had slowed everything to a crawl. The first thing Alkit saw was the walls were down and much of the forest lay flattened or on fire. Many of the structures around the colony had collapsed when the shockwave had hit. Everywhere he looked, Choctaw were running around. They were trying to fight the fires and save those trapped in the rubble. The ship, with the bulk of their supplies, was gone. Alkit felt numb. Even with all the activity, he heard nothing. It wasn't even fear. It was like his mind was shut down. It was a slow realization that they would all die on this planet, either from the nightly monster or starvation. Alkit realized that he was on the ground. He didn't remember falling, but it didn't matter. None of it did. Robert entered the cave with Max, his bloodhound. He pulled the blind he used to hide it back in place. As he took off the fur hat and jacket, he again marveled at how smooth the soft fur was. He'd made them from the skin of the small mammals that lived near the river. To him, they looked like giant water rats. His wife had always tried to correct him, making him all the more determined to call them that. Her memory brought a smile to his weary face. He put his hatchet away and tossed 4 more chitin plates on the pile in the corner. He started a small fire, the smoke hole hidden from the easy view, then put a pot on to boil. Throwing the chictra legs and arms he had collected in, Robert set to task of preparing some vegetables that he had managed to cultivate in the forest. Robert was still amazed by how much the chictra tasted like crab. Max went to his corner and curled up in the mat Robert had made for him. The hound knew that he would get some of the meal. As he finishes the meal, he gave part of it to Max. Then he headed to bed that he had made himself. A picture of his wife with their son and daughter sat next to it. He sat down, looking towards it. "Sarah, I got a few more of them dung beetles today. I realized I'd been thinking too small sneaking into their camp. Tonight I managed to get to their ship. I took the stabilizing rods out of their engine. Heard it blow about an hour ago." Robert sat there, a tear running down his face as he thought about how beautiful his wife had been. The little boy Kevin and daughter Jasmine had made him so proud. He had thought that they would have a bright future at the small colony. Sarah had at first protested but gave in to his insistence this world was safer than Earth. He felt that cold hatred come back as he remembered coming home from that hunt. His home burned with the bodies of his family inside. The whole colony was dead and burning. The chictra had killed them without mercy or provocation. The only survivors were a few others who were out hunting like him, the chitin plates being their form of currency. looking back at the picture. I know I'll probably join you all soon, honey, but I promise you those bastards will pay for what they've done. Up until the end, I'll make them pay. With that, he lay down to sleep off another long night of hunting. End of story. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters: Bushmaster 117, Casper Arnholtz, Drexzoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.